Judith Moritz there. The Nine has obtained figures showing a growing number of pupils being classed as school phobic. That's when they won't go to school because of anxiety or mental health issues. In one local authority, there was a 90% rise in primary children classed as school refusers over a 4-year period. Now, the Scottish Government is facing calls to do more to tackle the issue. The Nine's Carol Erskine has been speaking to those who've suffered this crippling anxiety.
I wanted to do it and there was something holding you back.
Well, I went through a very strong period of self-blame, thinking that it must have been my fault.
As the parent, you live with a very heavy heart. It never leaves you, not for a minute.
All children and young people in Scotland have a right to education. From the ages of 4 or 5 to 16, this is where they will spend a lot of their time. But for some, going into the classroom is a terrifying experience. Acute anxiety can start at any age and the reasons behind it are complex, but the effect on the child and their parents can be devastating. Emma O'Connor lives in Edinburgh. Her son refused to attend school in primary 5. He did not want to be named or interviewed as part of this report.
It progressively got worse. So it went from being able to get him in to not being able to get him in to not being able to get him to walk out the door. But in the end, we were unofficially home educating without any preparation or not knowing what we were doing.
What started as an issue getting her son to school quickly consumed the whole family.
Yeah, isolation was one of the biggest problems. Like I couldn't engage with the world outside us, our family and my son, to the point where I lost some of my friends as well as some friends thinking that I was just ignoring them. It's been a trauma, there's been something that's gone wrong that, you know, no one can say what it is really. He couldn't verbalise what the cause was, but there's something that had gone wrong and he needed time to heal.
Emma's never found out what caused her son to stop attending school, but after a year out with counselling, he was able to return. Reasons for school refusing include separation anxiety, concerns about a parent's health, or an undiagnosed form of autism or Asperger's. But for all, the end result is the same: the child cannot go to school.
When pupils don't come into the classroom, their absence is given an official code. It could be sickness or holidays, but school phobia is not included in that code, meaning the Scottish Government has no centralised figures about the numbers of pupils who don't come to school because of mental health issues.
Refusing to go to school is quite common, but there's then a smaller number of students who the thought of going to school becomes completely overwhelming, distressing, and they then actively start to avoid it. But I think that the difficulty is in trying to understand what the prevalence rates are, because trying to get those statistics when there's so many different reasons, so for schools to actually categorise this into school refusal is probably quite difficult.
But some councils do keep those statistics. Figures obtained by the Nine show the most significant rise was in Midlothian.
In Midlothian, 249 youngsters refused to attend secondary school for at least one morning or afternoon in 2014-15. 3 years later, that had jumped to 310, a rise of 24.4%. But at primary school, there was a much bigger increase. For the same time period, 54 pupils refused to attend in 2014-15. And again, 3 years later, that had jumped to 103, a rise of 90.7%.
For many youngsters, help comes from child and adolescent mental health services. We travelled to Sussex to meet a former teacher who's now trained as a life coach working exclusively with children and their families. She and her son were both school refusers.
I've had a child say to me, I wish I had cancer, because then people would understand that I can't do this, and I totally get that, having been one myself. I stopped going to school at the age of 11. So for us, or for me particularly, it was a real sort of kind of wake-up call when our son, at the age of 14, started fighting going to school.
I was very terrified and embarrassed that I wanted to be there, and I had friends that could see that I wasn't getting into classes, and I didn't know why, and it was wouldn't be able to sleep, and then being forced into a car and trying to jump out and having been more or less restrained just to get you into the school, and then having a very painful experience being there and then having to leave an hour later because that was that. Yeah, you needed it. Yeah, I don't like think about it now. I think about it. Yeah, and it affected my brother and sister as much as anything else.
Yeah, it was pretty
very unfair.
Pretty hideous time. Really pretty hideous time.
Yeah.
Yeah. The farm and having the space was a bit of your salvation. I think that actually is, because I think you probably would have been actively fairly destructive to yourself had you not had that.
Yeah.
I think that would have been a really considerable worry that Al would have been self-destructive if he hadn't had the space here to come back to.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, wire.
With his mum's help, Alexander was able to overcome his anxiety and go to college. But his experience and many others highlight a growing problem that parents and schools seem underprepared to address.
And Carol is with us now. Carol, some really compelling stories in there. We heard that there are no centralised figures collated for children refusing to go to school in Scotland, and it's hard to kind of categorise that. But you have figures from Midlothian and another local authority.
Yeah, that's right. We also had figures from Inverclyde Council. Now, they show that there were no pupils classed as school refusers until 2016-17, when there was one pupil at secondary. Now, the following year, that had increased to 15, but today the council said that was only 0.15% of the school population, and it varies from year to year. They said school refusal was not a significant issue for them. Now, as you say, Midlothian was a council we heard from there, and they say they're analysing the data that they provided with us to better understand that increase in school refusers.
What about the Scottish Government? What have they had to say about this?
Well, we asked for an interview with the Education Secretary, John Swinney, but we're told that he wasn't available. Now, in England, there appears to be growing calls for school refusers to be classed as an official reason for absence at school. Many of the parents we spoke to would like to see the same in Scotland, but the Scottish Government did give us a statement which I can read, and they've said it's vital schools do all they can to promote good attendance. They said they've recently updated guidance to schools and local authorities to set out how to promote engagement and motivation, including among those who may be at risk of poor attendance. And they say it is up to education authorities to decide what sanctions, if any, they will use if there is an unauthorised absence. But I think for parents and professionals, there needs to be a greater understanding here of this issue, the symptoms, and how to help these youngsters.
OK, Carol, thanks very much.
Right, let's explore this issue a little further with educational psychologist Patricia Duggan. Good evening, Patricia. Thank you very much for being with us. Let's be clear about this from the start. I mean, everybody has a few days off once in a while, but this is not just casual absenteeism we're talking about, is it? It's not truancy either. These are young people who can't bring themselves to go through the school door, right?
Yeah, I mean, as the name suggests, they find it very difficult to attend school, and it wouldn't be because they don't want to go, it would be because they have significant anxiety at the very thought of going to school. And that anxiety can present itself as panic disorder, or present itself as, severe kind of physical symptoms that they actually feel terrified at the very thought of going to school. It's different from truancy, where young people generally would present with some antisocial behaviours, and there wouldn't be the same fear around attending school.
We hear a lot these days about young people's psychological issues and the increased pressure on young people just going through life these days. Are you surprised at the increase that we found in these figures?
Not particularly. I think we're seeing a rise in anxiety across the board with young people and with adults. When it comes to school refusal, there isn't actually it's not actually termed as a psychiatric disorder, but instead what we see is it's linked to other forms of anxiety. So along, when we take younger children, often what we're seeing is separation anxiety, and that means that they're afraid to be away from their parent for whatever reason. And often that means that they're refusing to attend school. They're frightened to attend school. Later on, coming into secondary school, we might see a lot of panic disorder. We might see social anxiety, which presents itself as a young person refusing to attend school. I think what's mentioned there, the ASD population, often we see a lot of social anxiety with that particular population, and often it's at that level of secondary school that we begin to see that come into place.
There'll be people watching this, I have to say, who'll be saying, look, we're just too soft on our kids these days. Back in my day, you got a boot up the pants and just told to get in there and get on with it, and eventually you sorted yourself out. What would you say to people who are saying that?
Well, I think parents often know their children, and they know if that's going to work or not. And sometimes it does. Sometimes taking a firm approach from parents is exactly what the children need. Sometimes making decisions like, well, if you're not at school, you're not on the PlayStation and you're not watching TV and it's not particularly comfortable for you to be off school. And sometimes that is enough. But often when we're assessing school refusal, which I think that's the crucial part of school refusal. We need a really robust assessment to look at all the factors that could be impacting on this child, and the result being that they won't attend school.
A lot of the councils we spoke to said they don't really kind of count the figures, they don't see it, recognise it as an issue, it's not something that's on their radar. Has it been taken seriously enough?
Well, I think it is being taken seriously, yeah. And I think the difficulty is in the term we use, because there can be so many reasons why a child doesn't go to school. And to just call it school refusal doesn't encompass all the factors that could be at play when that child's not attending. So there could be family factors, such as bereavement, marital disharmony, those kind of factors. And there could be also more serious social factors within the family. Within the school, there could be bullying, there could be learning difficulties, there could be social isolation. So all these factors need to be looked at before we even look within child at whether there's a specific anxiety disorder.
And very briefly, if you could, it strikes me that this is one of those cases where young people can easily fall between the cracks. If councils aren't really having this on their radar, is there enough joined up thinking on this?
I think we have systems in place within schools, definitely, to alert professionals when there is a problem with a young person when he's not attending. I suppose my biggest concern is that sometimes there's a delay in that coming to our attention, whether that be from parents perhaps being a bit embarrassed at the child not attending school and maybe making some excuses, or whether it's the systems within school that perhaps cause that delay, because early identification and early intervention is crucial for these children.
All right, another illustration of how hard it is to be a young person these days. Patricia Duggan, thank you very much indeed for that.